All right. Welcome to This Week, Next Week, Group M's podcast. I'm Kate Scott-Dawkins.
Jeff Foster.
And I'm Nidhi Shah.
And we have an exciting special guest with us today. We have Aisha Khan, who is the head of client engagement for GroupM Global Commerce. We're going to get deep into commerce and retail media a little bit later on. But first, I think we're going to talk about the top 25 sellers of advertising. We now have data in for all of these companies, so we can see and talk about updates to concentration of those largest media players, winners and losers in terms of share. We'll get into some of that. We will talk about US TV, Nielsen, sports as per usual. We can discuss our brackets, Jeff. I'm all about it. And then we'll wrap up on Europe, European economy and internet usage, what people are using for streaming there. So sound good? Should we jump in?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Let's do it.
Excellent. Obviously, doing what we do, it's very important for our work in forecasting in this year, next year, to have both a bottoms-up view of looking market by market and what they see in those markets, what they're feeling on the ground, as well as a top-down view where we are, adding up what we can see centrally and globally from the biggest sellers of advertising, what that tells us about the direction of travel, concentration, elements of competition. And so we now have results in for all of our top 25 advertisers and estimates for the private companies as well. The ranking at the very top of the table remains pretty set, as you can imagine, although Meta and ByteDance both increased their industry share. ByteDance, including TikTok, represented more than 8% of total ad revenue in 2024 by our estimates. Google still the clear leader with more than a fifth of the total. Any thoughts on what it would take? What would it take to shake that up? But does that just continue at the top of the table? Do we think, Jeff?
Yeah, is the short answer. I mean, there might be some changes and share along the way, but I just can't really see too much, challenging these companies at the moment. I mean, especially as we'll get into later in the show, just looking at, YouTube in the US and what a juggernaut that's become. I just don't see the end in sight. Am I missing anything here?
I think you're right. And these also, again, are companies that are investing hugely into AI and maintaining their competitive advantage in that space too. So I think that's right. I will say, speaking of AI and investments in those companies, Pinduoduo, which includes Temu, now outranks Microsoft at number 6. So that was a change in rank in the last year or two. We've made some adjustments too on our assumptions for these companies. And we're going to be speaking with Aisha later about retail media specifically and how prevalent retailers are now amidst the largest sellers of advertising. I mean, the 4th, 5th, and 6th largest ad sellers are all retailers. So they are right up in there at the top of the league table. Yeah.
I was going to say, what do you think this means for legacy media, that they just become more and more niche, or, is this just the new world they're going to have to get adjusted to?
Look, I've been thinking about this a lot, right? Because I think it's less helpful to look solely at, traditional TV advertisers as their market size, right? Everyone advertising on these platforms is advertising. I was trying to think of an analogy the other day. You can tell me whether this works or not, right? So there's a town somewhere and all these, several cafes that all offer pour over coffee, but you have to go there. You have to be in the store. It takes a while. It's expensive, and then these mobile coffee trucks come to town and they drive all over and they park in the parts of town that weren't serviced by the cafes, and they offer digital ordering and delivery, and you don't have to go in. It's quicker and it's more convenient, and maybe you have more options for the types of coffee you get. And yes, there are still people who are going to seek out those cafes. But if they're in a part of town where they can't find one, maybe they also go to the digital cart. But all of these people are drinking coffee, right? So it doesn't make sense to me for the cafe owner to only look at their competitors as the other cafe owners, because really they could be stealing customers, or at least also selling to customers that are, customers of these coffee trucks, right? So in that sense, I think, yes, it's going to require innovation. Yes, it's difficult in some sense. We've seen that with the transition to streaming. If we think about a transition to offering more inventory in a programmatic or self-service way rather than just a direct sales way, I think that could help, right? But I think the right thing to do is look at the total market, and looking at how you can grow share of the total market would be my it's sort of a long answer to that question. What do you think?
Yeah, so coffee for everyone.
Right? Everyone loves coffee. Yeah, I mean, like Comcast, Disney, Paramount now sit at 9, 10, and 11 in our rankings. Warner Brothers Discovery down at 15. RTL and Mediaset have dropped out of the top 25. They used to sit in there. But again, those more regionally focused players just aren't able to get that global scale in order to maintain their position in the top 25.
And I think it's something to keep an eye on too, just, as they more and more ad tiers get introduced on the streaming side, just to see how that, starts affecting the ecosystem and the shares.
Yeah, for sure. So if we look at concentration amongst all of those top 25, and this is we're looking at the same group of companies, so not necessarily a dynamic 25, but the current group of 25, share rose to 66% in 2024 from 63% in 2023. So, globalization and scale do continue to pay dividends, as we've been saying. And, regulation outside of China in terms of looking at competition and some of those things, I think hasn't yet made a huge dent that we can see in aggregate, right, amongst this group. And actually, if we look at something like Tencent, the eighth largest seller of advertising, grew 18% in 2024, helped by, I think, within China, softening regulatory scrutiny, regulatory environment. So in some cases, it's gone the opposite direction. But yeah, lots of China-based players in this top 25 as well. You have ByteDance, Alibaba, Pinduoduo, Tencent, Baidu, JD, Kuaishou, Meituan. So fully 8 of the top 25, and Xiaomi. Xiaomi is knocking at the gates of the top 25. So that would be a new player there, sitting just behind Pinterest in terms of 2024 revenue, 3.5 billion versus Pinterest 3.6. So watch that space as well.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into retail. Let's bring Aisha on. Hello, Aisha. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Excellent. So we've just done a bit of a dive into our top 25 ad sellers. Meituan was on there. For those who aren't familiar with that name, this is like a DoorDash or an Uber Eats in China. They grew ad revenue 19% last year. We include quick commerce in our full definition of retail media within the business intelligence team. How are you seeing quick commerce players evolving their offerings for advertisers? Meituan's by far the largest of the global folks or regional national players. In our analysis we did with your team last year, we noted, quick commerce as a whole, we're sort of still lagging behind grocers, for instance, in terms of their retail media offerings. But what does that look like this year and beyond, do you think?
I think this year will be a pivotal moment because I think a lot's changing in terms of the priorities for these quick commerce players. And what I mean by that is, like, when you're in the quick commerce space, so much of your energy in innovation and investment gets sucked into, frankly, logistics and your basic app technology. That advertising is still, for most of them, a nice to have. And especially in Asia, there's so much growth in this space natively that and they're getting so much money from, like, just the commissions and the sponsorships that they haven't had to focus as much in this space. Now, we will see with what's happening now geopolitically and how things are changing, if that changes the priorities and there's a need for more diversification for these quick commerce players and where they get revenue, especially given the margin profile of advertising, in which they start to really think about and double down and advocate and invest in the space. Probably for Meituan's interesting because I mean, they're huge. So about like 1.5%, maybe slightly over of their delivery, like gross merchandising value is actually advertising. And if you compare that with like, and I was thinking about how they would grow, right? And I was thinking about, obviously it's through innovation. And one of the partners I really love in the Asia quick commerce space is Grab. I just think they're really innovative in what they do for advertising. And they're doing things like putting ads on two-wheelers, doing cost per order pricing versus like CPC or CPM pricing, which is interesting. So I think there's innovative ways in commercials, there's innovative ad formats. Probably the biggest opportunity for Meituan is porting their data. So like audience portability with someone like a Trade Desk, which is something like Tencent and Baidu already do. That way, you know, my whole philosophy on like retail media is it's going to evolve soon to being almost more of a measurement play than an actual media play. And so I think quick commerce players can, you know, it's an easy lower lift way for them to be able to take advantage of the, you know, the boon in advertising without having to build like entire advertising teams around it.
Well, let's talk about folks that are investing though, right? Because that's kind of how you started, right? Like who's actually going to see this as a major diversification play, a major pillar of investment for their business versus who may outsource or partner more often, right? I think one of the biggest examples outside of, say, an Amazon is Walmart in terms of what they're investing in and how much they see it as a pillar of the business. Walmart was the 21st largest seller of advertising in our estimates, including their Vizio ad revenue, because that acquisition closed. It grew faster than all but two of the companies ranked above them. Those were Pinduoduo and ByteDance. How are they integrating that Vizio acquisition in their sales pitch? How much is that media ownership and the sort of OS system there impacting why advertisers may choose to work with them?
I think it's definitely a bullish factor for them. I think the reality though is that Amazon Prime has 200 million accounts and Vizio has 18 million. So it's still a fraction. So when especially now, as you know, I'll call it endemic players are looking for scale, they're looking for efficiency. There's a push to figure out how do you balance brand awareness or do you go full on into performance in a challenging year. And so different CPGs are taking different routes, but I think I do think what Walmart is going for them is that there's still a huge chunk of in-store sales, at least in the US. And so the ability to be a measurement player, I think for them is going to be that big push. I think one of the biggest things that they can do is really low-hanging fruit. This is selfish and biased, but about a few months ago, they locked access for agencies to access Luminate, which is their insights platform around shopper retail insights, in addition to connecting that to audience insights. And it's such a goldmine of data. So once you start, you know, pigeonholing the agencies in terms of their data access, it makes it hard for agencies who are still stewards of a good chunk of dollars, right, to be able to advocate for Walmart investments because they don't feel like they can actually, build their best strategies around it, right? And so I think it's been an interesting move in terms of like they've framed it as like this data compliance, reasoning, and they don't want bad actors to get into Illuminate and scrape the data, which is fair. But I think they've got to figure out a workaround for that because there's obviously a lot of white hat players that are also now, you know, blacklisted from this. So for me, that's a huge thing is if they can bring the agency partners into the fold for them, I think that would be an area to bring them close, right? Walmart at the end of the day is so close with these CPGs. It's a very hard relationship dynamic to break.
Yeah.
Whereas Amazon very early had this advertising platform and kind of dual path, this merchandising and advertising route. Whereas for Walmart, it's still, if you really think about it in the grand scheme of Walmart, it's still relatively nascent.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, more growth ahead.
Okay. Well, you mentioned Amazon, and aside from maintaining their number 4 spot and accounting for more than 5% of total ad revenue in 24, more than a third of total retail media revenue, really, and nearly two-thirds of retail media ex China, excluding even Twitch and Amazon Prime Video. So major player, as you as you said. Aside from rolling out to additional markets, because we know they're rolling out with Prime in new markets, for instance, Prime Video especially. Where is that growth gonna come from in your mind? What are they looking for there?
I think the big thing they've got going for them right now is sports. I think
Mm,
sports has been a magnet for brand spend in general, live sports, live TV in general. It just garners that attention in a world where attention is scarce. And so I think that'll be a huge like growth pillar for them, and not just for endemic, but for non-endemic as well. I think non-endemic spend, especially with fintech, telcos, travel, I think they're all seeing the value of the targeting, the performance that Amazon can drive for them. And I think they're also hungry, same as endemics, for for performance and efficiency. And so I think that'll be an area of growth for them. The second pillar of growth, I think it's related to advertising, but I think will come from actually pushing cloud services onto a lot of their endemic players, and kind of framing it as this, oh, we can offer this data collaboration, clean room type offering, not just from an advertising perspective, but also from a operations, logistics,
right.
retail data perspectives, kind of like Illuminate ish offering. But in order to get that, which is super compelling, you need to have this AWS type partnership and contract and spend X amount. So that's an interesting, negotiation play I think they're pushing for.
Yes. Okay. Excellent. I mean, it ties into everything we've been talking about also with all these big players and how those AI and data investments are going to see them through well as into their advertising sales as well. I should thank you so much. That was great. We'll have to do this again.
Oh, absolutely. This was really fun. Appreciate you having me.
All right, switching gears a little bit now that we've been talking about Prime and YouTube. Jeff, what was in the news this week in terms of data on more the TV side and traditional advertisers side, or broader TV?
Yeah. So, excuse me. So Nielsen released their monthly gauge report, which is shows data on usage and where people are viewing TV on which platforms and which distributors. So this was notable for a few reasons. That YouTube hit a record 11.6% of all TV viewing in February, which is the second time YouTube has been in first place among all distributors. So it just goes to show you more and more data out there that YouTube is just becoming a juggernaut. It's just basically becoming how people are watching TV. And it's also interesting to note that the overall viewing upturn has been driven by older audiences. So viewing from adults 65 and older has nearly doubled in the last 2 years, rising 96%. So it's interesting to see that, can we say, is television old-fashioned now? Is that safe to say?
There's something about the sort of the OS driven. As more people buy smart TVs, they get used to selecting tiles, selecting apps. If YouTube is just there, if they're searching and YouTube comes up as an option on search, I think that really helps, right? Drive a lot
Yeah,
of that
off of a low
audience.
base. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that too. But I mean, that viewing experience, making your programming as easy to find as possible and as prominent as possible, I think is definitely beneficial, and one of the reasons I think I'm still bullish on as we get to the reaggregation cycle,
Yeah.
which is coming. It must be coming because it always follows disaggregation. That the folks in charge of those OS systems, and is your button on the remote or is your tile up front and center? Are you spending to make sure that your content is on
Mhm.
the prominent on the first page? That has a big impact in terms of driving viewing and consumption going forward.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting, especially in YouTube's case, that they're not driven by any tentpole programming. So people are actively seeking out content that they want to see, or following or subscribing to certain channels and creators. So it's a little bit of a difference than opposed to the other distributors that are part of this data set. So I think that's interesting to see that people are more proactively finding their content rather than maybe passively turning on something in the background.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, they do have sports in some rare cases, right, in the US
Yeah.
with NFL, but for the most part, it's just a huge library of content, and they have been spending. We've talked about content spend in past podcasts, right? They've been investing in that. And we talk about how share of investment in content, can lead to share of viewing, and I think YouTube is tends to be a good example of that.
Yeah, and I wonder if that, how that, if you're an advertiser, how that impacts pricing. Because if this audience is more engaged and they're finding certain types of content, does that mean you're advertising that the value is higher? Can YouTube charge higher premiums? So I think it's going to be interesting to see how this all evolves.
Yeah, there's a perception evolution there too, right? In terms of we know that when we've spoken to clients, there are some markets where clients are more likely to do YouTube alongside TV as having maybe a similar brand equity or similar impact on the business. And there are some markets where that just hasn't filtered through yet, right? So I think it's still very market specific for that question.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And how's your bracket doing?
Yeah, I don't think I really want to talk about that.
I had a really rough round of 32, but actually, my sweet 16. Talking about the March Madness tournament in the U.S. here. Speaking of sports and things you might tune in to watch some highlights on YouTube, maybe. But yes, it is March Madness season, and so I've been following more college basketball than I normally do. I, of course, as a UCLA Bruin alumna, had optimistically, I had UCLA beating Tennessee. That did not go down well. Oh well.
Yeah, well, I made some aggressive choices, but I still have Duke in there since being an alumni. I gotta go ride that one till the very end. So at least I'm happy about that, even though my bracket is a complete mess, and I will probably finish in whatever the lowest percentile possible is.
It's a shambles. I'm doing okay. I think I was ranked in the 20s or 30s in our Group M
Oh,
pool the
that's pretty
last time
good.
I checked. So
Yeah,
yeah, no, it's not bad. It's not
yeah,
bad.
that's very respectable.
All right, well, switching gears to the UK, we had some economic data and just the general. It's a vibe check. Let's do a UK Europe vibe check right now.
The weather's great, so can't really complain. But yeah, so UK inflation really falling to 2.8%. Interesting to see actually that figure being slightly higher than the euro area at present. And we also had the budget this week and a lot of news around the growth forecasts around the UK. They've decreased from that 2% growth figure to 1% for this year, halved. And a lot of questions about the link between the economy and the advertising market. It's during these uncertain times that advertisers might be cautious, but it's precisely during this periods that using advertising to kind of for that brand building rather than solely focusing on kind of the performance-driven advertising that kind of becomes a bit more crucial. So different ways of thinking about advertising. But yeah, happy to hear your guys' thoughts.
Yeah, look, I mean, getting lots of questions from clients right now around what's going to happen and how are current geopolitical changes going to impact advertising? What are other people doing in this space? Which is, uh, a bit difficult to say. But I think what we're looking to do is understand ranges and what might be possible if we say, advertising growth is X, but really within a margin of error of what could be any one of these things, and at least a direction of travel. And I think that there is still a lot of activity happening, especially within technology and AI, that will continue to drive growth. I think that you know, automobile manufacturers who are currently, looking at expanded tariffs within the US are going to be looking for other markets to refocus in, or like potentially Hyundai and investments in the US in terms of factories, that there will be, again, efforts to mitigate some of these impacts, right? So that we don't see a catastrophic fall off, but rather shifts and workarounds. So that's the current the current understanding and estimates, but all that's going to feed into our June reforecast as well.
Absolutely. It's one of the interesting data sets I was looking into this week, especially top on mind, especially given the kind of YouTube discussions we had earlier in the podcast, was media consumption and how much of internet is being used for the different types. So in Europe, we have the Eurostat data, which shows a real divergence between the video formats and the viewership on that front. So YouTube remains a popular choice, with about 62% of individuals viewing content on sharing services. Now, this figure includes YouTube. That's higher compared to content viewed on some of the commercial streaming platforms such as Netflix and Amazon, about 50%. And content on broadcasters is the lowest, about 48%. So real divergence between the different formats and platforms, but YouTube on top, kind of aligned to what Jeff, you were saying earlier. I think what was also interesting is, for Europe, the number of people using internet to read news. Now, that was higher than how much people would use the internet to view TV and videos. And although print is expected to decline, print really represents a greater share when we look at advertising revenue in Europe than anywhere else in the world. So that was my nugget for this week.
All right. Any plans for the weekend? Things that are coming up next week?
There's been a lot of advertising around adolescence, so I started watching the first episode. So I will definitely catch up on that, and catch up on the Apprentice episode from yesterday.
Yeah, I think maybe more so earned media too, right? Less so outside advertising, but definitely a lot of conversation about adolescence on Netflix. I actually just finished it last night, so yeah, I won't spoil anything, but I'll be keen to hear your thoughts after. And other than watching your bracket continue to melt down, Jeff?
Yeah, I think I got to give Adolescence a try now. The buzz has been pretty good on that one, so that's on my list. We just had the start of baseball season, so being a Dodgers fan, this is very exciting to actually have an ownership group that cares. So it's going to be a fun season. And
I don't know how this is going to work with me being a Giants fan and you being a Dodgers fan, Jeff. I think this might be difficult.
It can coexist.
Okay, all right.
So yeah, looking forward to that, to the season, and yeah, just gonna probably catch up on Below Deck, Down Under, which I have only 3 episodes into, but it's been a great season so far.
Okay, excellent. Well, send in suggestions and comments to us at business.intelligence@groupm.com, or hit like and subscribe. And we will see you all here again next time. Thanks. Next week is a podcast from GroupM, WPP's investment company. Its views and perspectives are intended for informational and entertainment purposes only and are not intended to be financial advice.